Welcome to the Restaurant Boiler Room, Season 6, Episode 6. I'm your host, Rick Ormsby, Managing Director at Unbridled Capital. Today in the Boiler Room, I'll be sharing some perspectives on my career and profession from a speaking engagement with a group of incoming college freshmen in California. I talk about my upbringing, career path, and give them life lessons that have been valuable to me. This would be a great episode for a young person eager to get exposed to some mentoring and guidance while charting out their professional future. The Restaurant Boiler Room is a one-stop shop for multi-million-dollar merger and acquisition activity and financial complexities affecting the franchise industry. We talk money, deals, valuations, and risk, delivered to the front door of franchisees, private equity firms, family offices, large investors, and franchisors on a monthly basis. Feel free to find our content at Unbridled Capital's website at www.unbridledcapital.com. Now, let's enter the boiler room. Well, I'm happy and honored to be here with you guys today. For those of you who know me fairly well, I do a lot of things wrong and all this and that. But I have a heart for youth and for young people. I believe in the future of this country and of the next generation that I see, amongst my kids and a couple of years older and a couple of years younger. So we're talking probably like the teens to the early 20s. And I've kind of, it's been a big part of, training them up and giving them guidance and mentorship has been something that's important to me. So, I may have talked about it in prior episodes, but for the last 3 years, I've done a mentoring session on a weekly basis and a Bible study with between 12 and 15, boys, and walked them through their journey of high school. And now they're all applying to colleges, which is exciting. I also do a mentorship with at least one business student at the local university each year. So I was asked recently by a friend of mine who had a big group of incoming freshman college boys to talk with them about my career story, where I came from, kind of what investment banking is, what it's like to be an entrepreneur. So I recently talked with them for about 45 minutes or so about all these topics. I think it went pretty well. I do get a lot of people now with kids in that age, wanting to learn about different types of jobs in the finance world and how, I got started. And so this episode, therefore, this month is really just that. Some of you who will listen to it may enjoy listening to it, if only because you'll get to hear a little bit about my personal story that maybe you don't know. That's cool, and I'm glad if you listen for that reason. And then, I'd encourage you if you're I'm going to be 50 this year. If you're my age or younger or older, whatever age you are, and you've got kids or you've got family that are at that precious age of trying to kind of learn about different professions, feel free to pass it along to them, and it's a free resource if it can be helpful to them in any way. And then I try to challenge them too, like I usually do, with some good takeaways. So with that said, here we go. Okay, I really am going to answer, as I counted out here, 10 questions. And question number 1 is just a simple one. It's who you are and what do you do for a living? And what I basically told them is I was born and raised in Kentucky, grew up in a small town in Kentucky, moved to Louisville, Kentucky, lived there a lot of my professional career, and moved in 2020 to Pensacola, Florida area, which is where we currently live and where I operate Unbridled Capital. My wife is Susan of almost 24 years, and I have 2 kids, Allie and Eric. Our daughter Allie is going to be a senior at Baylor University, and our son is a junior in high school, Eric. I run Unbridled Capital. Those of you who listen to this podcast already know this, but for those of you who are tuning in new, you'll hear that Unbridled Capital helps franchisees and franchisors in the sale and financing of their businesses. A way to think about what we do for a living is if someone, just throw a brand out there, owns 40 wing stops in Utah. I don't know, just throwing random numbers and brands out there, and they decide that they want to sell that business and they want to sell it to one buyer. They hire our company to be the advisor, to tell them what it's worth, to put it on the market, to find the best and most qualified offers for the business, and then to help get the deal closed through the facilitation of negotiation of the contracts, the franchisor approval, the leases, the due diligence, the financing, helping the buyer with their financing if needed. So these are just a number of things that we do in the administration of our advisory role, and we call ourselves M&A advisors. You also can hear a term investment bankers. which is kind of a sexy term. When you hear investment bankers, they typically have more tools in their belt than maybe an M&A advisor does. Typically, an investment banker has actual access to capital. Our company doesn't really keep our own capital and use it in any of our deals or take any risk in a company that we sell. We're just really more on an advisory capacity, but we also call ourselves investment bankers too, loosely. What you would want to know about me, interests, I love, those of you who have listened know that I'm a Christian, and that's a big part of who I am and how I live my life, and, and the interests and hobbies that I have. I also like to boat and travel, and I love sports. Okay. And I'm a big basketball guy. I've been a basketball fan since I was a young boy, and I love Kentucky basketball. I'm a Tennessee Titans NFL fan, and my wife was born in Tuscaloosa, which makes me an Alabama football fan. So hate on me all you want. That's kind of my story there. The second question is, what was your path from high school through college? So, because because a lot of these young men and young women who are heading off to college kind of want to feel, kind of hear a story about that they can relate to. I grew up in a small town in Kentucky to a, middle-class family. No one in my family worked for a big company. A lot of them, my mom was an insurance agent who was also a pilot. Back in the 70s, when it was not a lot of women were in aviation. So I kind of grew up with a very strong mother, a very independent mother and family, who really kind of had that kind of a farming mentality of, you eat what you kill and don't rely on it. Don't rely on anybody else, but you have to do it yourself. So I kind of grew up under that type of a household. I was pretty good at school. I wasn't the best. I was probably the dumbest National Merit Scholar that you're going to find. But I was a National Merit Scholar. I was really good at math, and I was very good in Spanish in school. I was kind of average in English and reading. And I was a decent athlete, but not great. But what I found was that I loved to learn and I loved to compete. And when I wanted something, I was probably more driven than most people around me at a young age. And I think that really, loving to learn, loving to compete, and being driven were some of and then a development of my personality of being an extrovert and loving to be around people. Those are kind of the things at a young age that I noticed that made a big difference. I went to the Naval Academy for 4 years, Texas A&M, University of Illinois. From those three schools, I ended up with undergraduate and master's degrees in engineering, and I went to work for Johnson Controls for 3 years, right at the age of 23, 24, as a sales engineer. They were a big company in Milwaukee, and I worked in the Nashville office. And I had this idea that I was going to use all my engineering background and my sales natural inclination to be around people to be a sales engineer. And there were 3 or 4 pivotal moments in my life. And, pivotal moment number one was clearly when I met my wife, Susan. I met her at 23 and we were married at 25. A lot of people in this generation are like, whoa, that's early. You were young when you got married. And one of the comments I would make is, I've never gone with the grain. I've always gone against it. And, today people are getting married at a much later age. But I think there's some beauty and really some joy in fighting through early life when you're broke and you're kind of trying to figure it out with a spouse, as opposed to waiting longer. There are all kinds of ways to do it and do it right or do it wrong. But I consider that to be a pivotal moment in my life, obviously. That's moment number one when I met Susan. She's been tremendous. We've been married almost 24 years. She's been my best friend, been by my side, and has really created a stability in our family that's enabled me to be who I am. And so I'd tell that to anybody, guy or girl who listens to this, and is going into college, that is going to be a big part in many of your lives going forward, and invest a lot of time in that, in prayer and in thought about that stage of your life, because it is not to be taken lightly, and it can have such a positive or negative effect if it's not done well. One of the learnings that I would tell you is that I got out into the real world and I didn't like engineering as much as I thought I would. And you were like, Rick, why didn't you switch? But I got all these engineering degrees, and I realized that what I actually loved was being around people, and I liked finance. Interesting, right? I started to show a little bit of chink in my armor in college when I went from like taking these really difficult math classes and getting straight A's in them and high A's to then going into the engineering classes that were like thermodynamics and electrical engineering and systems engineering and some of these classes that require you to understand how a system operates. And my mind was not very good at it. And I would look around in the classroom and people would be like passing me like a horse in a horse race, right? And I couldn't keep up with them. Not that I was terrible at it, but it just wasn't a special gift of mine. And I saw that. And so my first learning to you all who are listening as students would be there's probably a really high likelihood that you're not going to work directly in your college major in your career. I think the numbers I've seen are somewhere between 80 and 90% of people don't use their college degree in their career. So that being said, I didn't, right? I ended up working in engineering for a little bit of time, and then I went back to school, MBA school, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But a learning I would say is don't overly focus on your college major. Pick a major that you think is going to be a decent major, and then just put your head down and work hard at it. I mean, if you have a total epiphany that you're like 180 degrees in the wrong direction while you're going through it, then maybe you change. But I think otherwise, I wouldn't be really supportive of trying to like change your major midstream and increase the amount of years it takes to graduate college from 4 to 5. I would instead just kind of keep my head down, try to graduate early, because the genius in all of this is going to be to get out into the work world quickly and then to get a job and to put your head down at that job for 3 years and just to see what you like, because you're never going to really know what you want to do for a living until you start doing it. And then you adjust from there. So gain knowledge in college and be flexible, and don't sweat your first job too much either, or your major. Just go for it. A couple of other comments from my early career, I'd say, is be hesitant, or pardon me, if you're interested in business, you will eventually find it like I did, and you can always go back, like I just said, to get an MBA later in life after working. So how did my career unfold? So so I decided to go back to MBA school. The dot-com era was in full swing in the late 90s, which it was really when I was starting to work. And I found myself being mesmerized by the stock market and stocks and bonds and mutual funds and making money and companies buying and selling each other. And it just naturally became something that I was really, really interested in with increasing amounts of, time. I would come home from work and I would spend hours reading and learning about the markets and learning about business. And it was just something that was interesting to me. And I was so smart that I put the only $2,000 that I owned into phone.com about 9 months before the dot-com bubble busted. And I mean to tell you, that stock, I don't know what it went from. I'm just throwing a number out, but it probably went from like $200 a share to $1 a share. How crippling was that? But a valuable lesson I learned at a young age about, kind of the cyclicality of markets and the difficulty of trying to earn an above average rate of return, right? I mean, it was brutal to lose your only $2,000 when you're in your early 20s, right? But I found a friend who was 2 years ahead of me, and he was a career changer too, and he was super motivated to become a private wealth manager. And he and I started hanging out a lot. And he was at Vanderbilt MBA school while I was living in Nashville working for Johnson Controls. And that's a kind of a commentary. Find somebody a couple years ahead of you who can be kind of an immediate mentor to you, and you can kind of learn from them and learn their path. And I think it'll help make you a little more laser focused on what you want to do. For him, I won't name him, but for him, he was a real blessing to me, and still a very dear friend of mine. And he kind of really helped me hone in my interest in business. And I really applied and really tried to go to Vanderbilt MBA school because of him. He was there. And he told me all about the school, and I applied, and I was blessed to get a full scholarship to Vanderbilt MBA school. And so this is pivotal moment number 2 for Rick Ormsby, because I was headed to Yale School of Management up in New Haven, Connecticut. I was accepted there, and that's where I was going to go to MBA school. And I interviewed, and I got one of the 4 full scholarships to Vanderbilt MBA school, and it kept me in Nashville. My wife was like, "Yo, Rick, I want to stay in the South. I'm a Southern girl, and you can't pass up a full scholarship." And I, almost a little bit relented and said, okay. We were young, married, and she stood up for Vanderbilt, and I ended up going there. But if I'd gone to Yale, my career may have been a blessing too, but it would have been a different career, right? Probably would have graduated with a lot of debt, probably would have gone to work in New York, in some sort of investment banking capacity there. It would have been a totally different career. And so pivotal moment number two was attending an MBA school at Vanderbilt on a full scholarship. And it really kind of formed my career because I knew I was a career changer, and I had to, and you may be in this situation if you end up working and then going back to school wanting to do something else. I thought to myself, the economy is really bad right now. This is what 9/11 was happening, right? So nobody was hiring. And I'm like, if I want to be a career changer, I'm going to have to figure out a way to get some experience on my resume so I can talk to potential recruiters when I graduate about what I've been doing. And Morgan Keegan in Nashville had an equity research department. And so I went and begged for a free job there, and I worked for them for, I'd go in at like 5:30 in the morning, and I would work till like 10 in the morning every single day, really. And then I'd go into school, and MBA school is a lot of work. And I'd go to school from like 10 to like 6, and then I'd come home and study until 10 or 11 o'clock each night. I was young, married. We could do it. My wife was working at Vanderbilt actually, but it was, but it was a little bit tough. It was a tough time, but it enabled me to have this experience. And oh, by the way, while I was at Morgan Keegan, they specialized in two industries while I was there in the equity research group. One was security, and the other was restaurants, because at Nashville had a lot of restaurants at the time: Shoney's, Cracker Barrel, Captain D's. I mean, I'm missing, Ruby Tuesdays. I'm missing others, but there were a lot like Louisville, which is where I ended up moving to. Those two cities, Louisville and Nashville, had like an over-indexing of corporate headquarters of restaurant franchise companies. And so I got to learn a little bit about the restaurant business enough over the course of 6 months to where when the terrible hiring market came around and Yum Brands came to interview, I just happened to be a guy who could talk about restaurants, same-store sales, and annual unit volumes and number of restaurants and franchisees and products and things like this, because I had had a little bit of exposure to it. And I'd taken the initiative, the painful initiative, to go work for free at 5 a.m. to get a little bit of experience. And so like all of a sudden, Yum Brands came to campus. They're like, hey, we do well in a recession. People like to buy low-cost food when there's a recession. And then all of a sudden, because there were no other big job opportunities, 1 million people were interviewing for Yum. In a good market at Vanderbilt, maybe 10 people would interview, but because no other jobs were around, tons of people were interviewing for Yum. And I just happened to have the experience. I mean, it wasn't much, but I had enough experience to get hired for an internship. And then I took a full-time job there and moved up to Louisville and worked for Yum for 3 years. Pivotal moment number 3, when I started to work for Yum, one day I had a guy who had some positional authority over me at work. He was in the marketing department, and we were working on marketing projects there. I was a finance guy, and we were trying to figure out will this promotion at KFC be profitable or not, and how much should we forecast that it'll raise same-store sales, and how do we get the product to the stores, and how do we market it, and all that stuff. It's kind of a fun thing to be doing. And he invited me to a Bible study in the basement of Yum Brands. And I said, man, I don't know, that's not for me. But I said yes, probably a little bit out of peer pressure. And I went down there and we opened the Bible, and I found my faith in Jesus Christ. And it was amazing how it happened. I became a student of the Bible, and it has, over the last 20 years, kind of kept with me. And it's been something that's really important to me. So it kind of guides my every decision and everything that I do. And so that was pivotal moment number 3. I was by whatever providence guided into a direction to say yes to this guy's Bible study at work, no less. Probably couldn't do that now. I really became in love with Jesus Christ. And so that's been a cool part of my life. I left Yum in 2005, and I became an accidental entrepreneur. It wasn't planned. I was kind of pigeonholed in a job where I was working like 70 plus hours a week and probably badly underpaid, with a lot of pressure and 2 bosses, and conflicting priorities and a lot of shifting things. I'd done a great job at Yum, I believe, but I was just worn out with it. And so one day I just stood up in my cubicle, and I just kind of at 11 o'clock one Thursday night, our first daughter had just been born, and I just basically just walked out. I just walked out of Yum Brands and told them thank you, but I don't want to do this anymore. I didn't have a plan, so that's pretty crazy, right? So my wife's mom was dying. I had a brand new baby, our first child, and I walk out on a well-paying job, and my wife's just staying at home with the new baby and her mom, who she's dealing with, and I all of a sudden have no income, right? So I became an accidental entrepreneur, but it wasn't a theoretical exercise for me, right? I had to hit the ground running and had to find a way to get paid. So I did a couple of things at first. I, looked into, I had developed some relationships with the franchisees and Yum Brands. And I realized along the way that some of these smaller franchisees didn't have anyone helping them if they were making a decision to like sell their business, to retire, to buy out a partner, if they needed to borrow more money, if they needed to remodel a store and didn't have the money to do it. Like all these little like financial kind of things centered around knowing the value of your company and determining your future and figuring out when you're going to sell something and if you're going to buy something. They didn't have anyone really helping them. The smaller franchisees did, and they needed the services. So I just kind of stepped in and started doing it. And I did it and I did it for, and I made hundreds and hundreds of phone calls over, probably 50 to 100 phone calls a day. And I did it for years, got to know people, got rejected and kicked in the teeth a lot, but eventually, was able to close the first deal, which was selling 4 Taco Bells in Kansas, and I didn't have enough money to make the next month's mortgage payment. And so it took me about 9 months to get going. And then a couple of others, some 15 Long John Silvers I remember we sold in the Cincinnati area. And then, the Texarkana KFCs were the next deal that closed. And, after like the 9 month to 12 month range, the pipeline had been built up enough to where I was able to keep it going and make a career out of it. And so, but it was really touch and go at first, and my back was against the wall. It was interesting. And after about a year of doing smaller deals, I started Unbridled in 2016. By hiring a bigger team and focusing on more brands and larger assignments. And that was really pivotal moment number 4 for me. And, where I kind of had the temperament to create a bigger company, to do more, and to utilize the expertise that I developed to kind of apply it to more brands and bigger franchisees. And so for the next, we're in 2024. I guess I'm going on my 9th year at Unbridled now. And, but really like my 20th year of doing this. And if you can consider the years at Yum, 23 or 24 years. So 23 years, I guess. But it's been a blessing. It had its ups and downs. Question number 4 is, what are your learnings as an entrepreneur? So that's one of the things I think of myself first as an entrepreneur, not as an investment banker. And I think it's helped me in my career because the services that we provide to franchisees, these franchisees are entrepreneurs too. And if anybody, I've got, like I told you, I got a lot of faults, but I know how an entrepreneur feels. I know what it's like to be sitting quietly in your house and wondering if you can make payroll, or laying in bed at 3 o'clock in the morning and staring at the roof and, at the ceiling and not knowing how you're going to figure out a problem. Right. And so to keep the company going, like I understand that. So that's the way I relate to a lot of these franchisees. And I think it's a, really effective way to do so. A couple of things, learnings as an entrepreneur, I'll go through them quickly. One, you've got to be self-motivated. If you're a young person and you've got to be completely self-motivated. You've got to be able to fail a bunch and be okay with it. I talked to you about the cold calls I made over all those years and all the rejection. I even kind of, started a franchising company with a new concept, and it failed. So, and it was a pretty big failure. And so you gotta be willing to fail fast and be okay with failure. A lot of people in this generation aren't that way. Like today's generation, a lot of the young people who listen to this, like you're used to being patted on the back, whether you win or don't win. And so maybe your parents have said to you, you don't deserve a medal unless you win. And if you don't win, you lose, and maybe a little bit of the wisdom behind some of that grouchiness is just that. You've got to be willing to accept failure in life, right? In order to move forward. There's very little work-life balance as an entrepreneur. Anytime you're asking or wanting to know about work-life balance, just go ahead and not be an entrepreneur, okay? You've got to be okay with delayed gratification. I see a lot of young people who want to be the CEO quickly, but some of my relationships have taken 20 years to mature and to turn into business. And if you're going to be an entrepreneur, you got to almost look at it like investing in the stock market with like a compound annual return of 7 or 8%. You drop your $10 into the market and it's only worth $10.70 next year. But if you look at that $10 investment 60 years from now, it's worth $25,000, right? And so this compound annual return starts off slow and almost not noticeable. But if you just delay the gratification and put your head down and work hard and stay true to it, over time, you'll create a sustainable and enormous competitive advantage. But you can't want too much too soon. Another comment about entrepreneurism: stay away from senseless risk. I learned that from being a broke little kid as 10 years old, I went to a Catholic kind of fish fry and bought a bingo card for $1, and I opened it up and I won 50, is it a $50 or $100? Can't remember now. And I, to a kid who had no money growing up, this was a big deal. So I had just struck it rich. And then what did I proceed to do? I proceeded to feed every one of those $50 and $1 increments back into buying more bingo cards, thinking I was going to double and triple and quadruple my money. And I ended up with nothing. And that was probably the best lesson about risk that I ever could have learned at a young age. But most entrepreneurs either A, are educated and are scared to take a risk, or B, are not overly educated and are senseless in the risks that they take. Both types of entrepreneurs are maybe doomed in many cases. But if you're well educated, you're sensible, and you know how to manage risk, I think that the opportunity to be a successful entrepreneur is high, because there are very few people who have those characteristics. Another thing I'd say is making money and investing money are two totally different skill sets. And it's difficult to be good at both. And maybe that's a random comment, but one day if you hold on to this podcast, you're going to come back to me and you're going to say, yeah, you're right, Rick. Making money requires like bold initiative, optimism, positivity, go-getter. Investing money is quiet, shrewd, calculating, kind of cautious. And so those two personalities are oftentimes dissimilar from one another and require different skill sets. So making money and investing money are two totally different skill sets, and difficult to be good at both. Owning a company is lonely and few people understand you. That's true. You have to have a supportive spouse if you are married. I mean, that's so important because the hours are not normal. You got to be willing to learn how to make decisions quickly and live with the consequences. I use the example of being a sergeant telling your troops to take the hill against the enemy. And and you realize as you're running halfway up the hill that it was the wrong decision, and that you're going to be running into likely death for a lot of your troops. So what do you do in that situation, right? You have made the decision. You need to be decisive at the decision to keep running forward. Or do you turn around, change your mind, and run down the hill and retreat? Well, if you do the second, everyone gets shot in the back and everyone's dead. So you have to be willing to make a decision and live with the consequences of it and continue on, even if it isn't the right decision, right? So you got to be decisive, and a lot of people aren't decisive. If you're not a very decisive person, it's hard to be an entrepreneur. Learning how to negotiate is super important. And this is, I think, a learned skill. So if you're in college, take those classes about negotiation, take those classes in public speaking, take those classes that require you to work in a team and push back against people in your team, because it's a super, super, super important and underutilized tool that you need to be an entrepreneur. And a good entrepreneur is someone who won't ask someone to do something that they can't do for themselves. How about that, huh? Number 5, how does someone become an investment banker? Well, there's multiple different finance paths. Corporate finance, where you're working for a company and helping them figure out how to do their budgets or to invest in capital projects. This is a typically, 50-hour-a-week job with decent pay, a decent, kind of return of your time, but clearly not the type of pay over time that you're going to get in the investment banking world. You have people who are doing investments, right? Who are studying the stock market and investing either companies or personal people's money for a return. I always liked that side of it. I worked in corporate finance at Yum, but I like the investments. And then you have investment banking, which is an area of helping people borrow money, helping people buy and sell their companies, helping companies go public or private. And those are kind of the 3 broad paths. There are other subsets of that. You've got real estate, and you've got other kinds, but those are the 3 kind of main, kind of finance areas. So you need to kind of research those 3 as you take classes. Take classes in all 3 of those if you want to become an investment banker one day, and learn the differences between them, the coursework, and kind of get to know the type of people and the personalities and the pay and the type of opportunities in those areas. Then you're going to want to try to get an internship. You would want to utilize your school's alumni network first, and maybe some family connections or friendship connections that you have also. If you're in the investment banking world and you want to come right out of undergraduate into investment banking, and you're not at a top 50 school, it's going to be really incumbent upon you to really push the limit of the relationships, the school alumni relationships, and also friends and family to find that first open door, because the analysts, typically out of undergraduate are coming from, kind of the Ivy League schools typically, right? And some of the really high ranked schools, and they don't have as many opportunities otherwise. So you got to find a connection. You got to work it hard. You got to expect no pay at first and very long hours. In the investment banking world, you're working 80 to 100 hours a week at times for big investment banks. Don't get lured into this profession by high salaries, because it comes with a lot of work and a lot of sacrifice on family, on free time. So don't get lured into the profession by high salaries, and you have to play the long game, and you have to be willing to sacrifice your time, and maybe in some cases your health, but certainly your time at first for a longer term reward. Yeah, one way to do it is to get into corporate finance, kind of like I did, and then go back to MBA school, and then use MBA school and a good degree at an MBA school to be able to use that to get into investment banking and to enter the investment banking world at maybe an associate or vice president level instead of at an analyst level. And that's something that you might decide to do. And also at that point, you can also focus on which MBA schools really produce the most investment bankers. So that would be a tried and true way to get into investment banking. If you can't do it out of undergraduate, you maybe go the corporate finance route instead and then go back to school. And then I think, there are different sizes of investment banking companies. You have the bulge bracket firms like Goldman Sachs, big, huge buildings in downtown New York, and they make the biggest deals in the world happen. You have mid-sized regional firms that have some generalist capabilities and some regional capabilities, but also maybe some niche markets. And then you have kind of specialist advisors and bankers like me who specialize in franchise businesses that are small, medium, and semi-large scale. And so you have all kinds of different sizes and specialties in investment banking. And so I think if you want to go the bulge bracket route, they're going to be looking more for pedigree. And if you go the smaller route, you're probably going to be able to hustle your way into a relationship and impress someone like me who was once your age and was trying like heck to find an opportunity to convince someone to hire me. You know what I mean? So those are maybe some pieces of feedback. Question number 6, what do I attribute my success? And I'm honored to answer that question, right? So what do I attribute my success? I had to think about this for a while. The first I would say is I was willing and eager to meet new people and genuinely get to know them. That's always been something that's been at the middle of my life. You can put me in a group of 5,000 people and I'm at my most energetic. 5,000 people I don't know. I really, I hope it's genuine. I genuinely love to meet new people all the time and hear their story, regardless of what walk of life they're from or what their profession is or who they are. And so I think you have to be willing to meet new people and be genuinely interested and get to know them. So I think that's number 1. Number 2 is, again, I've got plenty of weaknesses here, but you're asking me, what do I attribute my success? So I hope I'm not sounding bragging, but I'm fairly perceptive and curious, and so I'll tell you a story that may illustrate this. When I was 10 years old, I was selling cookbooks for my mom on a convention floor. And I really quickly realized that mom had me cook up some recipes in her cookbook, and it was like a chocolate cake, and I would hold a pan and I would ask people if they'd want a sample, and then I'd tell them, hey, do you want a cookbook? And what I really quickly found out, even as a 10 and 11 and 12-year-old boy, was that the people who ate the samples of cake and wanted to talk to you the most were the ones who you might be able to sell one book to. But the person who was going to buy 50 or 100 cookbooks for their gift shop or bookstore was quickly somebody who had their head down with a clipboard in their hand and was walking fast and not stopping at any of the booths to talk. And I saw that. And I was like, aha. And so I went to that person and started chasing them down in the convention hall before I was even a teenager. And I would make all of a sudden, my mom would come back. She's like, honey, you just sold 250 books while I was gone. I was like, yeah, mom, and so in that kind of story, I would just say I was always kind of perceptive and curious of how to solve problems and watched how people behaved. And I think that was something that was part of my success. I was also persistent, hard to say no to. I would just keep running through a brick wall. I can remember in college, one of my college, and you'll get this is before, people, employers would mail you letters saying that you weren't approved for the job, or they gave the job that you're applying to somebody else. And in college at the University of Illinois, when I was getting my master's, me and some buddies we called it the wall of bong. And we would take all these no letters like, sorry, we've given the job to somebody else, we'll keep your information on file type of letters. And we would tape them to this huge wall in the living room of this house. And it was almost like a Picasso at the end of the year. I mean, I think we had somewhere between 60 and 100 kind of bong letters taped on the wall. And it became kind of like a motivator to us, right? Just like you got to keep hammering through it, and you got to be told no a lot before the right opportunity comes up, and maybe it's just one shot is what you get. And when you get that shot, you got to take it. Other things to my success, clients have told me it's because they feel like I'm trustworthy. And so I'm honored and blessed by that. And I would tell you to listen to what your grandparents tell you about your word is your bond. So be trustworthy. Never go back against your word. And then the last thing I would say about attributing my success is serve a cause bigger than yourself. It can't just be about you. You know what I mean? Like you learn humility, and you learn that service for others makes you a better and bigger person. And so for me, obviously, you've heard me talk about in the last couple of minutes, my Christian faith and the service that comes and the benevolence that flows through that has been a big part of what I believe my success is, because it has helped ground me and humble me in a cause and a people, a cause that's bigger than me and people who are more in need than me. And I see, unfortunately, and it's because of our capitalistic society, a lot of young people don't get that. And I want you guys to get how important that is. And so, even at Unbridled Capital, we've given away several $100,000 charitably to various organizations. And we typically do on most of the deals that we close, we give a portion of the money back to the brand as a blessing to their foundations or to a charitable cause, because I want our company to also, to even in a small way, to be thinking about serving a cause that's bigger than just ourselves. So seventh question is valuable life lessons along the way. Okay, so this is number 7. I think this is a good one. So listen to this. It took me a while to come up with this, but don't buy the advice of people who tell you to find your passion in life. So many people say that. If you're a young person, and how many times have you heard, find something you're passionate about and it'll never be work to you. But I think that's mostly empty and worthless advice from people who likely have never found their passion and are trying to give advice that they couldn't take. So I would not listen to a lot of that advice. Some of it's probably okay, but here's what I'd tell you. Don't worry about finding your passion. Instead, find something that you're pretty good at, put your head down and work as hard as you can, and don't pop your head up for a couple of years. And if you're good at it, you'll be rewarded by your success, I'm convinced, and this will make you eager to continue doing it. And if you're not good at it or you're not rewarded for your success, then you move on. And you use that to find your grounding and to find your success in your career. You don't just kind of skip around like Alice in Wonderland trying to find something you're passionate about, because that is like this kind of like amoeba of vagueness that really is not actionable against, right? Well, I mean, I'm passionate about watching football on Sundays. Well, what's that going to do for my career, right? So just work hard, put your head down. And then if you're good at something, you'll be rewarded by your success and you'll make it something at that point that you enjoy doing, right? And I happen to love my job and career. You probably hear it in my voice. So much so that I no longer even notice or delineate the difference between working and not working. This job and this career I have is a blessing for me. It's not a burden. Was it my passion? Well, no, I kind of happened on it because I told you earlier, I abruptly left Yum Brands, but did I put my head down and work hard at it and then achieve some success with it? And then it just kind of started snowballing, and the success and affirmation I got from it helped me enjoy it more and more. I mean, that's kind of how it happened. So another valuable life lesson, know your personality type. I like change and I love to learn. Those are probably, other than being an extrovert, those are my 3 big things. And thus for me, a static corporate job or a government job would never have worked for a long time. It worked for a while at Yum, but it was never going to be something that I could do over and over and over again because it's too static for me. And so, look at your personality type. Think about maybe take a personality test, talk to your folks about it. They're all over the place, and start to dig into, don't overdo it, but like get a little bit of an idea of who you are likely to be based on your personality type. And then try to match that up a little bit with a type of career and a type of job. In the M&A field, investment banking world, we do the same thing with every client, but every deal is different. Deals have different personalities and different brands and different unit counts and different sizes and different challenges at different times. And so there's been enough change and enough new, fresh, continued learning in my job to keep an otherwise fiddly person, standing pretty still over 20 plus years. So it's been the change within the job that the investment banking job has been really perfect for me, because M&A deals change constantly and that feeds my personality. And then lastly, I did say, I'm an introvert, an extrovert. So I get energy from working with people. And you need to be thinking about that a little bit. What type of personality do you have? Are you an introvert or an extrovert? I mean, if you were going to be a researcher, like researching stem cells or whatever, I don't know, that has a different personality type than being a door-to-door salesman. You know what I'm saying? So try to match those things with them. Another comment about a valuable life lesson is mentorship. I found a mentor at 30. It was someone generally, I think for you, will be someone older at a different stage of life and perhaps in a different career path than yours. But it's somebody who can pour into you who's not your friends and who's not your mom and dad. And I saw my faith and my perspective on life grow immensely when I had this young man or older man in Louisville, Kentucky, who was my mentor for like 15 years. And he was double my age. I was 30, he was 60. And he knows, because I've told him over the years how important he is to me. But be open to mentorship. Another area, a valuable life lesson, is to learn how to speak in public. Learn how to speak in public. Most people say that, or many people say that speaking in public and death are for some people, those are like interchangeable. They're both so scary, right? So, but public speaking skills can be learned. What you're hearing in my voice is the result of teaching Sunday school lessons at church for 10 years in front of 100 to 200 people with a podium, teaching a topic that I knew less about than the people in the stands. And I had to field questions not knowing and comments not knowing what they were going to say. And so that proved to be a really great training ground for being a public speaker, because you had to learn to think on your feet. You had to learn how to handle conflict. You had to learn to not know the answers to things and be okay with that. And you can probably see that through the 6 seasons of the Restaurant Boiler Room that we've been doing. And I've been speaking professionally, at Restaurant Finance and Development Conference coming up this year. It'll be the 3rd year in a row they've asked me to be a panelist, right? And they keep telling me that other than the main panels, yours is the most popular panel to be attended every year, right? I'm blessed and honored by that. But a lot of that is on the training of being a speaker that was developed at church over all those years. And so find a way to learn how to do public speaking and to train that skill. Even if it's somewhat of a weakness, it will suit you really well. My last piece of advice would be to be unique and interesting. You don't want to be like everyone else. Robert Frost said, I took the road less traveled and it has made all the difference. I mean, that is one of my signatures. I'm not really like anybody else. I never have been. I might identify 30% over here with somebody here and 30% over there and 30% over, but I'm not really, I'm quite unique in many ways. My wife tells me you're a mess, right? But I've always been unique. And I would say the same thing. You don't want to follow everybody else's path. You've got to carve out a little bit of a path and a road less traveled, and don't be afraid of it. You know what I mean? Don't be afraid of it. Okay. Tools that helped me along the way. Just a couple more questions. Number 8. I've read a bunch when I was in my early 20s. And so I think 2 books that meant a lot to me were How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. And I also later took his sales training course, when I was in my early 20s, and it made a huge, huge difference in my life. I stopped asking in interactions with people, stopped talking about myself all the time and started with genuine interest, asking people about themselves and listening to their stories and listening to what they said. That simple application of one of the first rules by Dale Carnegie will make a huge difference in your relationships with people. I mean, it will make a massive difference. I also, later in life, I loved the 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss because it taught me to kind of let go of all of my, preconceived notions and anxieties of what people think about me. And so those are 2 books. There's plenty of others. I've taken my kids through the Rich Dad, Poor Dad and some of the other books out there that are really kind of meant to kind of give you some business acumen. So I would say read a bunch. Tools that help me also were traveling and learning other perspectives. You may or may not know that I speak Spanish. It was a really big deal for me in high school. I spoke it fluently. I still speak it probably with 70 to 80% fluency, but I don't use it as much as I used to. But I studied it in college. I read Don Quixote in Old Spanish, which was like a 700-page book. That was hard. I won awards for non-native Spanish speaker in college. And so I think traveling, learning other perspectives and cultures really helps with listening, negotiating, and with empathy. If you just stick in the same bubble all the time, you tend to become insulated and opinionated and too hard in a world that needs us to be a little softer, if that makes sense. Other tools that help me, I keep multiple groups of friends. And like I said to you earlier, I'm willing to meet new people still at this age all the time. But I keep multiple groups of friends. I don't just have one group of friends. And that's really kind of helped me be flexible, open-minded, and listen to new perspectives, so that's been important. And then I've also really gotten into trade journals and conventions and, kind of an experts, and so I read a lot about experts and in any place to learn best practices, what my competitors are doing, how my clients feel. Usually in those types of formats and forums, I dig into those a lot. And so I would encourage you to find things like that once you find a possible path that interests you, and you'll learn a ton in a hurry. So number 9 is, what is the outlook for your generation? So you're asking me here, what do I think about your generation? Now, a lot of people are going to say, oh, our world's going to heck in a handbasket, right? And, things are awful, and look at all the wars and the terrible politics, strife going on in the world, and all these things are true. But I'm going to deliver a mildly positive note, which is I have been around a lot of young people in their teenage years and the early 20 years. And I am frankly really motivated by the desire to learn and achieve and succeed and to improve our world and our country in the young people that I see that are around my sphere of influence. And I know I'm not talking about everybody, but I'm telling you, there is a strain of really awesome young folks who are going to make a big difference in this world. So I have a generally positive outlook for this generation. I would say a couple of things to tell you. Number 1, supply and demand is a big deal as it relates to sales ability. Selling things and the ability to sell things is going away in our world. Because your generation, your young generation is, and it's not your fault, but you're a technology generation. And so you communicate in short threads on social media and apps and all this stuff. And your ability to look someone in the eyes and to be persuasive and to convince someone to buy something or to believe your point of view in person is an ability that your generation just naturally doesn't possess as much as our generation. And the demand for people who sell things that way may slightly wane over the next 20 or 30 years. But keep in mind that people like me are going to continue to be at the height of their career for the next 10 to 15 to 20 years. And we grew up that way. So the supply is going to be really, really down of people who can sell things. And the demand of needing sales skills is still going to be there. And I think the ability to be a strong salesperson, whether or not you sell, but just knowing how to sell, even if you're not in a sales job, is a trait that will have increasing importance and will be increasingly rare going forward. And so I encourage you to make that a part of your college education. And if you don't get it in your coursework, seek it out in seminars and training classes and things outside, like the Dale Carnegie class or any other type of way to learn sales training tools. And again, do it even if you're not having if you're going to be a CPA and you have no interest in being a salesman, do it. Go to sales training. And then again, be honest, be hardworking, be dependable, and don't expect too much too soon. The simple age-old characteristics that will win as presented by your grandparents. And then lastly, in number 10, and this is the final one, and thank you for holding on here, I would say the question is, give me some advice now to a freshman in college, as a 50-year-old man at this stage in your career. And so this is kind of my final way to kind of give you some thoughts that I think are, to sum all this up, would be really pertinent for you. The first thing I would say is to always be a learner. Be intellectually curious. Learn. I don't care what it is. If it's how a daffodil blooms, or how a bird flies, or how a stock is priced, or how an airplane carburetor, functions. It probably doesn't even have a carburetor, but always be a learner. Learn and be academically curious. Be curious. And I made the example of compound interest, but I think learning is the number one thing that you can do to guarantee an outsized career that when you're my age is going to outpace everyone else who doesn't have that characteristic. And you won't notice it much at 20 or 21 or 19 or 22 because you're only building a little bit of knowledge above your classmates and your friends at an early age. But if you continue to do it throughout your life, you're going to wake up at 50 years old and you're going to be in command of so much knowledge and wisdom that you're going to be outpacing everyone around you. And so I think that's my number one. And if I had no other advice, that's my advice, is always to be curious and to be a learner. Second thing I would say is make relationships now. They will more likely mean more to you than the ones you make later in life. When you're in high school, and now that you're going into college and leaving high school, but in high school and college, it's really the only time where you make friends because you pick the friends that you make. Think about that. At your age, you pick the friends that you make. When you get into your mid-20s and 30s and 40s, you're making friends based on who's your workmate, or you're making friends when you have, a family based on, if your daughter's on the same soccer team as another kid and they're friends and you make friends with their parents. But it's a circumstantial relationship that's more likely to be temporary. But yet, as I look back on my career, and I've talked with other friends of mine, it is more likely that you will keep, if you have 7 or 8 really good friends at the age of 50, it's more likely than not that a majority of them will come from your high school and college days. And that's because those are impressionable times when you get to choose your friends and you get to enjoy those relationships over a long amount of time. So for that very reason, don't lose touch of your high school friendships and really invest in the experience of college and making relationships when you're in college, because some of them, many of them won't mean anything, but some of them will be precious jewels that will last with you through thick and thin for the rest of your life. That's number 2. Number 3 is to explore your faith. If you're hearing this and you're, have no desire to, or no interest in faith, in Christian faith or any other faith, I would challenge you when you're in college to explore your faith. Why did God put you here? What is the meaning of life? What happens to you when you die? These are things that are age-old questions that every man and woman who's ever lived on this earth has had to wrestle with. And I think they are worthy things to wrestle with as you go through college. Number 4 is to find a mentor. I already talked about that. Even while you're in college. And it's someone who's not your parents and not your friends. Number 5 is to be willing to work hard without complaining. Okay. Number 6, we've heard me say it before, is be patient and don't expect riches or success to come your way immediately. And then number 7, man, I would say go for it. Do as much as possible as soon as possible. Life is fleeting. And the quicker you get out there and make things happen, and the earlier you find your path, the longer you will have to run it. And so I am one of those carpe diem kind of guys that says, seize the day. Go out there and do as much as possible. Be optimistic, learn, make relationships, explore your faith, find a mentor, work hard, be patient, and then go for it. And go for it as soon as possible and as much as possible. And I hope in closing that you found this to be a blessing. I wish those who hear it the most success as you go on your journey, whatever path you choose. And for those of you who've just learned a little bit more about me along the way, thank you for tuning in.
Thanks so much for entering the Boiler Room today. You can find our podcasts on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, and Spotify. If you like these podcasts, please listen, rate, and review. I also encourage you to visit our website at www.unbridledcapital.com for the best franchise M&A and financial resources in the industry. Our website includes webinars, podcasts, videos, white papers, and a list of our past M&A transactions. Please note that neither Rick Ormsby nor Unbridled Capital Advisors LLC give legal, financial, or tax advice. These podcasts represent opinions that have been prepared for informational purposes only. We expressly disclaim any and all liabilities that may be based on such information, errors therein, or omissions therefrom.